Hi, I'm Rick Collins of abingtonnews.org. Thank you very much for Kevin Tachi for letting us take over his studio, his virtual studio today for an important conversation with Abington School Superintendent Peter Schafer. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning to everyone.
So let's just jump right into it. We basically are now a couple of weeks out from what was the most disruptive school year in a few generations. Now that you've had a couple of weeks to kind of mull it over, what really stands out to you about this?
I don't think that you understated that. It was exactly that. And people use words like epic and historic, and that's what we're living in. I remember canceling school for what I thought was going to be a weekend or a week for a deep cleaning, and we'd be back. I remember actually thinking the weather's been pretty good. We're going to get out pretty early. And then we never went back to school. And that the situation just continues to evolve on a weekly, daily basis, and that hasn't stopped. It just continues to evolve so quickly. That's what stands out in my mind.
As an educator, how tough is it to not have kids back in classrooms? Is it just it's another feature, you're still an educator, or is there something different about having kids physically in the spaces?
100%. In order to be most effective, you need kids together. We've come a long way with technology. There's a human element here that technology can't replace. And we've always known that. This has proved that. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot that we're going to benefit from during this time period. But the interactive piece between people in the same room can't be replaced by technology. And I think I speak for many, many educators when I say they're working harder and they're working differently for less by using these distance models. So the satisfaction that you get for accomplishing what you want to accomplish with kids isn't the same as when you're in their presence.
I want to jump on something you just said about good lessons that were learned. Is there something that can be taken away when we have a new normal, when kids are back in full time, that having gone through this will make the learning experience better?
Absolutely. What we've learned about the implementation of best practices with technology has been huge. I mean, our learning curve has been incredible. And to be able to use technology effectively and more effectively in classrooms, or in a way when students are absent from school, or students can't, for one reason or another, keep up, and they need the assistance of technology, so it's more personalized and individualized. Those advancements have been made through this period of time. We can carry those things forward.
Let me ask a little bit of a trite question. Let's say you have a time machine and July's Peter Schafer can go back and talk to January's Peter Schafer. What is the advice that you give that person?
I guess I wouldn't have a lot of advice for that person at this point, and that's probably a shallow answer. It's because I couldn't, because the information unfolds so quickly. You have to respond as it unfolds with the latest information, or you're not making decisions based on the best information. And to be ready to not come back to school would be something I would tell that Peter Schafer in January when we go out, obviously, but hindsight's 20/20.
Okay. In terms of understanding how students did during their distance learning, were you able to measure essentially how many participated on a day-to-day basis to understand were the majority of kids participating, or did it trail off towards the end?
Absolutely trailed off towards the end. And even if they were participating, measuring the value of that engagement is a whole nother
Mhm.
measurement that we haven't been able to other than did they engage or not, credit, no credit, we haven't been able to determine. And so at the younger levels, students were probably, I think, more engaged than at the upper grades. It's all of a sudden it became the responsibility of parents who were working or may have different situations in their households to be people that got their students homeschooled during, and it was I know it was difficult on families. I know it was difficult on kids. I know it was difficult on educators.
Are there numbers that you are happy with or comfortable with, or do you, do you feel like there was any sort of a failure in terms of the numbers that you're seeing?
I think that I'm proud of what was done in a difficult circumstance, and I still feel dissatisfied that it wasn't what we want to do for our kids.
Okay. What was the feedback that you've received from parents? I believe you sent out a survey at the end of the school year. What was kind of the
That
main
10 to 1 was the best time to be interacting with kids. People appreciated the synchronous, meaning the live piece with kids. One of the difficulties we have is that how effective is a live session with 25 different people on a computer screen at the same time? What are each of those individuals getting from their classmates when there are 25 different people on the screen at the same time? It's not much because they're still focused on the teacher, which is something that they could do asynchronous at a time when it's more convenient for families. So depending on the circumstance, going live or not live can be best depending on the family.
What about from teachers or other administrators? What type of feedback have you received from them?
Just frustration. We want to do more. We want to be in person. We know that's the best way to do our jobs, and we can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The teachers miss the kids. I would be remiss if I didn't say that. And then the kids miss the teachers. When we saw those drive-bys, there were kids, almost jumping out of the car to say hello to their teacher, and their teachers that just, they just everything in their body reaches towards, wanting to see those students that again in March we thought we were coming back, and then all of a sudden everyone was gone.
So looking forward a little bit, you haven't had as much of a summer break, I imagine, as you normally do. You're probably pretty busy trying to figure out what the fall is going to look like, I assume.
Yes. And again, the thing that's making that difficult is the way the situation continues to evolve as we plan.
What's the latest guidance that you're working off of?
So what we've been asked to do is create 3 different models. One model is students return to school, all students, and that would require masks, distancing between desks of 3 to 6 feet, 6 feet being better than 3, but 3 is the minimum. Hand washing, mask breaks. Students in grades 2 through 12 would be required to wear masks. Different traffic patterns in buildings. Drop off in the morning, pick up in the afternoon would have to be very structured and therefore very slow. And transportation on school buses. We still haven't gotten guidance on what that transportation would look like. We're still waiting for that. We're still waiting for the template and the form with the questions that we would be asked to do that in-person piece. And as of Friday, some of the conditions under which we would plan the in-person have already changed. And so even schools that planned this before Friday, which they haven't, would have to change those plans based on new guidance. And so that's the frustrating part, is that this continues to change so quickly as we plan. And so, it's already feeling like the summer's over and school's starting very soon, and school systems are struggling to get plans in place. So the first plan is that in-person plan. And I described some of the struggles with that and what that looks like. The second plan is a hybrid plan. The hybrid plan is students would be at home and students would be at school. Half the students would come one day, half the students would come another day, and then we would swap. One of the difficulties with that is that teachers would be teaching remotely to some students while students were in school. And so the same teacher would have to do both groups. And so how and when would they have time to plan for that? That might require a day where nobody comes to school, so the teachers can plan for both. And then the last model is a completely remote model, which is what we've done, but we'd want to make some improvements on that in terms of grading, accountability, pushing forward with materials, new concepts, curriculum items, take the lessons learned and tweak that. And so all three of those plans, all full in person with protective equipment and safety, social distancing in place. The hybrid, where students are at home and at school, they switch, and the remote, those three plans are due to the Department of Education on July 31st. And again, the difficulty is that the conditions under which we can operate changed Friday afternoon at 4. So we are working on those things now. And I will tell you, if I could, and I'm going off track a little bit. One of the challenges with the shifting framework is that the teachers associations in Massachusetts need to agree to these in terms of working conditions, because they're different than they've ever worked under. The politicians are digesting this in a public discourse right now in the media. And the economy is stalled. And the virus has its own idea in terms of what the virus is doing, in terms of what it's going to do. And only the next 4, 5, 6 weeks will tell us what the virus wants to do here. And so during all of these different competing influencing factors, we're trying to put a plan together that's best for kids.
Can you give an example of what changed, for instance, on Friday that makes this planning effort so challenging?
So just to be quite honest with you, one of the biggest challenges is lunch. And if you just do the math, having kids 3 feet apart with masks on isn't going to happen during lunch. You have to take a mask off to eat lunch. So you are then required to be 6 feet apart. Mm-hmm. And the square footage compared to the number of bodies and places to feed them becomes a challenge in our buildings when students are 6 feet apart. Eating individual classrooms. Teachers also need to eat lunch. The change was the allowance for cafeteria spaces or larger spaces in buildings to be able to provide lunch. And so just a minor change like that means a change in the lunch schedule, which means a change in the building schedule, and changes even program of studies in terms of what can be offered to kids, because it's about available physical spaces and the schedules of available staff to meet the needs of kids.
Are there any challenges that are unique to Abington, or that maybe isn't unique, but that is Abington specific based on either our school buildings, the way we're arranged? Is there anything that's popping up that is particularly difficult?
It's a great question, because every district is unique and has its own physical structure of grades. We're actually in a lot better shape than many districts. We're not in the best shape of all, but I'm going to say we're in the top third. And that's simply because Abington invested in a new building with a great deal of technology. So for the years prior to this pandemic, we've been doing professional development and using the technology. And so when we talk about remote or we talk about hybrid, we're in a better place than most of Massachusetts. And even the physical spaces in those Depression era buildings that we were in, the center and the North School, and even the high school with undersized classrooms. These classrooms that we have now with the new square footage allowances still aren't enough because nobody planned for 6 feet apart instruction anywhere. But they're still larger than those older buildings. Some districts have buildings that were built in the 70s, so they have no windows, no ventilation or air during the energy crisis of the 70s. People using older buildings are substantially more challenged than we are.
In terms of classroom, Abington doesn't have 30 kids in a classroom like some of the more urban districts do. I mean, I grew up going to schools where 30 kids in a class was pretty normal. Are we able to fit a full class in a classroom, or do we have to look up a way of reducing class sizes further to make this work?
Especially across the district, we're in pretty good shape with that, with the 3-foot distance in classrooms. It's going to go back to the old-fashioned rows and no collaborative working between students. The high school is a little more challenged because some of those classes by nature of the program of studies are larger. And so we're concerned that not all students will be able to get all of the program depending on what they have. For example, a science room is a larger room. An English room is a smaller room. And if there were going to be 30 students in a high school English class, adjustments need to be made to the schedule. You're right, we don't have many classes that get to 30. We've got some that are at 28 at the middle level. We've got some that breach 30 at the high school level, but that's doable because of the subject area and the age. But that's where those challenges are.
But in particular, the elementary school, maybe junior high, we're not seeing a need where we have to split up classes into a smaller segment.
Nope, they would be okay with numbers for full in-person. The other thing that's out there is that not everybody's going to send their kids to school. And we've got families that are going to be concerned about this, obviously. If we did go full-time, everybody, that's yet to be determined. And so they would be a part of a remote learning model that we also have to design, those people that elect not to send their kids to school. And we have teachers who have concerns about family members in their households that will more than likely not be coming to school. So staffing is potentially going to be, if we all come, is also potentially going to be an issue for all Massachusetts communities.
So jumping on that idea of parents having concerns, you recently sent out a survey to parents and guardians. Have you been able to start to look into what you receive for feedback?
And I'm glad you mentioned that, believe that I'm looking at the date. That survey was due, I thought it was due yesterday? I'll check. I think it was due yesterday. So no, we haven't. I was going to remind people to try to fill it out, but I think it was due yesterday.
Okay.
So it closed late yesterday. We're going to start looking at that now.
So, but obviously it seems like you've heard from parents who have concerns about their students returning in the fall.
Yes.
And are there different guidances coming out about whether they would be considered traditional homeschooling students or remote learning? Is that just putting a camera in a classroom and letting them watch from afar, or how is this going to be different?
So the camera in the classroom is a great idea, and I wish it was something we could do. There aren't enough cameras for us to order. It's impossible to acquire them. One of the things we looked into weeks ago was getting cameras. Not even knowing that we'd be able to build out a method that way. We just wanted to explore that. No, there will be a package for people that they'll be able to use independently for remote learning, either provided by the district or provided by the district through the state. the state, people can always homeschool their children if they choose.
Mhm.
If people elect to stay home, they'll be provided an online option for their education. We'll be either able to get seats in that online package from the state of Massachusetts, or we will run our own.
Okay. Do you
And
have a sense?
I apologize. You had asked, so we do have a survey out today. The previous survey did ask about sending your child to school, and we had preliminarily about 60% of our families said that they wanted to send their kids to school, which is still 40% that don't. I also feel, though, that we need to continue to send these surveys out, because that might change
Right.
in the next 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the trajectory of this virus. It could get better, could get worse, that number.
One of the flashpoints that seems to come up is the discussion around masks and whether or not their kid or teachers even would be comfortable wearing a mask for essentially 6 hours a day. But it seems that the guidance says that a return to school isn't possible without masks. Although I think some districts around the country are trying to do it that way, but it doesn't seem like that would be something that's feasible. That seems like that's going to have to be part of the equation.
I'm not a doctor or a medical person, and when the medical people tell me that it's our responsibility to have people wear masks, that's what we'll do. That's what I'll advocate for. It's going to be a challenge, plain and simple. There's no way around that. That will be a challenge.
So, do you think that, based on what you have at least today, that it's workable to come back to school in the fall?
I think each of the 3 scenarios are possible.
Okay.
And there will be, I mean, anything's possible, but one will emerge as the best one for Abington. And then we'll be very public about that. We'll talk about that. We'll get comment on that. We'll get more input on that. And then a decision will ultimately need to be made.
So we've been hearing a lot from on the federal level about pushing districts to reopen this fall. We've already seen some school districts, such as Los Angeles County, will not be opening this fall. What will the determining factors be for Abington?
So there'll be a vote of the school committee.
Okay.
That determines the method in which we open.
Does the Mass Department of Education ultimately going to say Massachusetts schools will be open, or are they leaving up to the districts to decide how that's going to look?
They'll be open in one of those 3 ways that I described,
Okay.
As determined by a school committee.
Okay. Have you gotten a sense of how these new guidances or regulations or policies and everything else, how it's going to impact fall activities, particularly sports and other activities?
I wish that I had a better picture of that. We've already started doing some of those workouts with our high school athletes, training, but those are being done on the turf field with equipment brought outside, following all of the social distancing protocols. To use the workout room, you can have about 8 students in there following the requirements. And so to have more students participate, we moved outside. Something as simple as those workouts required that. So you think about more close-quartered sports, like football. I don't know how something like football would occur with the social distancing guidelines and practices the way that they are. And everyone knows that phase 4 is there's a vaccine. So in these phases without a vaccine, I cannot see how high schools in Massachusetts are going to have sports like football. That doesn't mean maybe there's another sport that they could participate in. I don't know.
As someone who's on the Abington Youth Soccer Board, you know, we're watching very carefully about how does this impact fall programming, because we don't know if there'll be a season at this point. We're hopeful that there will be, but you know, I don't know how much sense it makes to have kids running around in masks playing soccer. And the same goes for volleyball, and the same goes for football and everything else. So I'm sure it changes by the week.
Yeah, as I think about it, I mean, maybe there are certain cross country or track, or, I mean, any of those sports where there's distancing. But I just don't know. And I'm not, you know, I'm not qualified to tell you. We're waiting for information on that.
One more question for you, Peter. Is there anything parents should be doing now to help prepare their students for the fall? Is it it's buying supplies, going over some extra worksheets of some sort, anything that would help get them ready to return that they maybe normally wouldn't do?
I think the most important thing I really want to ask people to do is our kids look to us for safety and security. And this is scary. And we need to be the stability in their lives. And we need to have that grit and perseverance and courage and the smarts that we ask our children to have. Just continue to please reassure them that we'll figure this out, and we will, and we're going to be okay. This is going to be a challenge. This isn't over. This is going to take some time, but we're going to be okay, and we will figure this out. And it's tragic and it's unfortunate that all of this time in their childhoods is being taken up by this crisis. But that's the condition we have, and we can't change that, but we can get through it as best we can and assure them. I mean, they can read fear, and that scares them even more. We will figure this out. We will prevail, but we need to be tough, and we need to have some courage.
Is there anything else I haven't asked? I think it's important to get out there.
No, I just actually, that last question is really what I wanted to say to people. You led me right to that, and I appreciate that.
Okay. Peter Schafer, Abington Public School Superintendent, thank you so much for your time today. And I'm sure we'll be hearing from you and the school committee lots in the next 6 weeks.
Thank you for helping me get this information out there.
You're welcome.